Welcome to today's webinar, Handling Great Power, the Great Responsibilities of Local System Administrators. Today we're going to begin by talking about accessing Evergreen and the importance of managing staff accounts and additional permissions. Then we'll move on to ways that you can tailor Evergreen for your library, including circulation and hold policies, group penalty thresholds, patron notifications, stat cats, and more. And then also library settings. And we'll finish up by talking about resources available to local system administrators and some best practices for contacting co-op support. So I'm just going to switch us over to Evergreen here. So as the administrators at your library, it's important that you know who has staff accounts, allowing them to access the Evergreen staff client through your library. And to make sure that you remove that access when staff leave employment at your library. So it's really easy to check who has a staff account at your library. We're going to go to search and search for patrons. And we can use the arrow to expand the search form. And I'm going to change profile group here to public library staff. If you're not a public library, you would go for PostSec staff or special library staff or government staff or K-12 staff, depending on your library type. And in this case, I am going to change it from searching the whole consortium to searching my specific library, which on the training server library here is Maple Public Library. And now I'm just going to click search. And this has retrieved every single library staff account for the Maple Public Library. And you can see we've got 14 of them here. And we've got one here that expires in 2026, most of them expiring in 2028, 2029. You'll take a look at this list. Make sure you recognize all the names in this list and that they're all currently active staff members. If we're looking through this list and we say, hey, this circulator, assuming it had a real name attached to it, this isn't somebody who works at the library anymore. What you'll want to do is go into that account. And we'll want to go in and we'll want to change that from being a staff account. Now, as a local system administrator, you can edit any staff accounts other than local system administrators. So if you need a local system administrator account edited, you do need to contact co-op support for that and just let us know what needs to happen with that account. So I'm going to go into edit. And if this is an account that the person has been using for their personal borrowing account, I would change that from PL Circulator to PL Adult, for example, and save that. And then I'd also go into Other and User Permission Editor. And you can see that they have Maple Library currently as a working location. As they're no longer staff, we need to uncheck that and scroll all the way down to the bottom and save. So this account no longer has staff access. And that's just going to reload there. If this person had secondary permissions, so I'm just going to go into edit here, and you can see we've got a secondary groups button. As a local system administrator, unless you're also an acquisitions administrator, that button is not available. It stays grayed out. But staff can have a number of secondary permissions. The reporter, cover art uploading, carousels, and acquisitions. And so if your staff member who's leaving has some of those secondary permissions, you do need to contact co-op support to get those removed as well. And if we take a look, there is a report that you can run to see who has those secondary permissions at your library. We have information in the manual here on how to run that report. It's the staff assigned to supplementary permission groups template. And I've run that here for Maple Public Library. You can see we've got some of the staff accounts repeat more than once because they have more than one secondary permission. And here I can just see who at my library has those additional permissions. And it's a really good idea to run this report at least once a year, and make sure you know who has that additional access, especially around the reporter. It's a really good thing to know who at your library can access the reporter and set up reports to run. Now, all of these secondary permissions are granted by co-op support as requested through tickets. The reporter access is a special case and does require staff to complete one of the reporter privacy waivers, which creates a ticket. And that's available on the bc.libraries.coop site. Now, when a staff member leaves the library, it's important, as I said, to remember to remove their access. And you can do it, as I've just demonstrated, by changing their permission group, removing that working location. If they're still going to need to use that account for their personal borrowing, you can also delete them through the Patron deletion tool if this account is just completely going away. Now, in the when Sitka started, it was common practice for library staff to have one account that they used for both their personal borrowing and their staff access. And over the years, this has actually caused issues when libraries are closing down a staff member's account after they leave the library, because those accounts are linked to personal borrowing data, so you can't just transfer them to a new staff member. They also can't be deleted if that staff member is still going to be a patron at your library and need their personal account. So we do now strongly recommend that library staff have separate accounts for their staff access and their personal use. And in our manual here, we do lay out the different types of library staff accounts. So if your library still has the hybrid accounts, we do recommend creating those new staff accounts for staff use and updating the old accounts to just be personal accounts. And if you submit a ticket to co-op support, support can help you make those changes if you need. Now, when somebody leaves the library, especially if they're a local system administrator, as I've said, it's important to make sure their access gets removed. And with local system administrators, something that's important to remember is that those accounts can register workstations, and they can register workstations on any computer with a browser. So it is particularly important to know who your local system administrators are and make sure that gets updated if they do leave the library. So I'm now going to take us back into Evergreen here. And we're now going to talk about some of the important administrative interfaces to be aware of, which ones you can update yourself if you're a local system administrator, and which ones you need co-op support to update for you. We're going to do more of an overview because we just don't have the time to go into each of the interfaces in depth, but there will be links for further information for all of these in the handout. So we're going to go to administration and local administration. And the first ones we're going to talk about is circulation policies and hold policies. I've actually opened these up in additional tabs already. So here we have the circulation policies for Maple Public Library. And these determine how your items behave. Each library gets to determine what items can have holds placed on them, how they circulate in the library. Now, for libraries participating in one of the 3 interlibrary connect zones, there are policies which determine how your interlibrary connect items should behave. And that those circulation policies and hold policies are determined by the circulation policies are determined by the checkout library. So we can see our circulation policies here, and then over here we can see our hold policies. With the hold policies, you do need to filter to see specifically your policies or the policies affecting your library. So in owning library, I'm going to choose ancestor here and then put in MPL. And I'm going to do the same thing with pickup library. And this will now show all of the hold policies related to my library. You can see some of the policies are showing for pickup library as PLF, which is the federation on the training server here, and some of them are specific to being picked up at Maple Public Library. I strongly recommend with the hold policies and the circulation policies that you come in, take a look. Our documentation has information on how to read these, how to understand what you're looking at here in these grids, as well as how to request changes. Because you can see your circulation policies and your hold policies in the system, but only co-op support can make the changes. And there's a list in both sections of the manual for these of the information that we need from you in order to update things for you. And for the hold policies, the documentation also specifies what you need to do for the filtering that I just did. Moving over to group penalty thresholds, which you also access from that local administration menu. This is where you control how many items total different patron types can check out, at what point Evergreen blocks further borrowing, with the number of overdue items, the amount of fees or fines owing, and you can also set up group penalty thresholds based on the number of lost items a person has. So you can see here the general threshold for checkout count is 50 for public library patrons here. But this library has a limit of 25 for specifically for PL Juvenile. Definitely recommend that you make sure you have at least the patron exceeds fines, patron exceeds overdue count, and patron exceeds checkout count set up for your user type, even if you don't want more specific limits for different groups. Because if there are no group penalty thresholds specific to your library, it's going to fall back to the Sitka ones. On the training server here, that's Greenland Consortium. And as you can see, those limits, thresholds have been set very high. So if you don't have group penalty thresholds specific to your library, Evergreen is going to let your patron check out over 9,000 items. So definitely something to come in and check, and make sure that you know what's set and adjust those as needed. And local system administrators can make changes to those group penalty thresholds. So that's something you control yourself. Similarly, coming over to the close dates editor, which again is accessed from that local administration menu. Local system administrators can enter the close dates. And it's important to ensure that all of your irregular closures are entered so that Evergreen knows that your library is going to be closed on statutory holidays and any other days that you would be closed that you would normally be open. So I've got an example here of the library being closed on March 5th for staff training. And what this does is it lets Evergreen know not to make items due on these days. And if we go to add closing, you can see we've got the ability to put in emergency closings. If items are already due on the day that you need to close, you can put in an emergency closure, and that will automatically update the items so they're due the day after the closure. And this is good if something unexpected happens. We've had libraries use the emergency closures due to wildfires, flooding, pipes bursting, and the pandemic. So you can shift those due dates. And again, this is something that local system administrators can come in and put all of these dates in. And we strongly recommend that you do this at least once a year and put in all the stat holidays, and any other closures that you know are coming. Next, we'd go to administration and then server administration to get to this menu. The one that we're going to talk about here is the only thing you generally need to access on the server administration menu, and that's organizational units. And this is where you can put in some of the basic information about your library. So in the tree here, I'm going to find Maple Public Library. And this is where I can put in the phone number and the email address for the library. And Evergreen will pull that information for patron notifications if that's something that you include in your notices. You can also put in your addresses. So we've got the physical, the holds, the mailing, and the ILL address. It's really important to have the addresses in here because, for one thing, transit slips use these. Both when you're printing the transit slip at your library, it'll include the address of the library your item is going to if you're part of reciprocal borrowing. So important for you and for other libraries to have these addresses in here. The other thing which is really important is that Evergreen uses the value in the state field, which is province territory, to build URLs for your patron notifications um, because everybody's public catalog has that um, province or territory code as part of it. Um, so Evergreen needs to know what your province is in order to correctly build that URL. If that's not in here in these addresses, the URL won't work if somebody goes to access their account or renew from a patron notification, and your password reset emails won't send. So it's really important to make sure all four of those addresses have that state and province. And you can see I've got BC for all of them, and it is your two character province code. Also, here you have your hours of operation. And this is where you tell Evergreen what your normal operating hours are. So you can see here we currently have Monday and Sunday as closure dates, and then we have our hours for Tuesday to Saturday. So if we were actually going to be open on the Monday, we'll change that date here, or sorry, the time, and hit apply changes at the bottom. So Evergreen now knows that we're open on Mondays and items can be due on Mondays. If we were going to be closed on Mondays, all I need to do is hit that closed button, and that updates that to show that the open and close times are both 12 a.m., so there is no open on that day. Again, hit the apply changes. There's a note. So I know there's some libraries who are open for a period in the morning and a period in the afternoon. So you can use that note to explain that the library is closed for a section of the day. You can include a note if there's anything particular about a particular day of the week that somebody needs to know. The other thing is, I know some libraries have different winter and summer hours. And you can handle those using a combination of these hours of operation and your close dates because you don't want to change your hours of operation over until you actually hit the day that those, let's say, summer hours apply. So what you'll want to do is in your close dates, you'd want to mark the days if you were going to be closed, let's say, on Sundays starting in the summer. You would mark the Sundays that you will be closed, where due dates would fall before you make that change. So if you're changing it the 1st of March, but your due dates are 3 weeks in advance, you would mark the first 3 or 4 Sundays as closures in your close dates editor. And then on March 1st, you'd flip this over to be closed on Sundays. And then Evergreen knows not to have anything due on the Sundays. And are the hours of operation listed anywhere publicly? Great question. Yes, Evergreen will pull this into your public catalog. If somebody goes to the page that shows your library information, and they can access that by clicking on the library name that shows up in the grid in the search results, and also on the record page. And the closures, any upcoming close dates also display there. I think it's the 5 most recent ones that show. So that is handling your closed and open times. Coming back over to the local administration menu, from there you can access the notifications and action triggers. Um, so there are a number of notifications that can be set up to go out to your patrons. You can see Maple has a few of those set up, but in the documentation, there is a lot more that you can set up if you wish. Um, Local system administrators, you can view these existing notices, but to change them, you do need to request that through co-op support. If we go into, for example, the 7-day overdue notice here, I'm just going to double click on it and I scroll down to the bottom, I can see the current template. And the training server uses the very generic default templates. But you can have additional information added in here. Um, for example, a lot of libraries at the bottom have their library information. A lot of the overdue notices will specify the number of days. So our records indicate the following items are 7 days overdue. Oops. And you can see with the code here, there's information that it's going to pull directly from Evergreen. So it's going to pull the user's family name, their first name. It's going to pull all of the information about the particular items that are overdue. So it's a good thing to come in here, look at the templates, see what's being sent out to your users. Um, Always a great thing to set up a situation where you get a notice generated for yourself so you can see what the email actually looks like. Because with all the code here, the email looks a little bit different than what the template does. But as I said, you can submit requested changes or requests for additional notices to be set up to co-op support. And we can help you decipher what's in these templates if you have questions. So I'm just going to hit back here. And I'll just note here that you can see 4 of these are email notifications. So they've got the reactor send email. And one of them is actually a trigger that after 90 days, it's going to set items that are still out and overdue to be lost, which is then followed up by this 90-day overdue mark lost notice that gets emailed to the patron when that happens. Also accessible from the local administration menu is the custom permission trees. It's called permission tree display entries on that menu. This again is something that you can come in and view, but you need to submit changes to co-op support. So by default, when you're registering or editing a patron account, the list of available permission groups is going to include all of those available to your library type. But that list can be further customized to include just those permission groups that your library actually uses. So for instance, if I am not a BC public library, maybe I'm one of the Manitoba libraries, I probably don't want the PLBC1 card showing. So I would contact COP support and get that one removed. The other thing to note here is that you can see that the list is customized. So we've got PL adult, juvenile, and teen at the top, followed by some other patron types with the PL ILL that you can use for libraries that you do interlibrary loans with outside of Evergreen. So you can actually dictate the order in which the patron types show. By default, generally we'll set those up alphabetically unless you request a different order. And you can also see the staff types are included. And if there are staff permission groups that you don't use at your library, those can also be removed from the list. And down the road, if you change your mind about the permission groups you want to use, those can always be added back into the list. But it does help prevent people from accidentally picking a permission group patron type that your library doesn't use. Coming back to the local administration menu, We have two here for statistical categories, the editor for item and the editor for patron. And I'm specifically going to go into the item one here. And this is where you, as a local system administrator, can create statistical categories for both the items and the patrons to capture information that a field doesn't already exist for. So you can see our examples here. We have for item, we have staff picks, summer reading club, and vendor. For patron, one of the really common ones is municipality or tax area. You can create stat cats and add values for them, but you do currently need co-op support's assistance if you want to edit or delete any of those values or completely delete a stat cat. And you can get that assistance just by sending in a ticket. And the last interface we'll look at and then talk about is library settings. So through local administration, you can access the library settings editor. Now, I went through and looked at the total. Evergreen currently has 478 library settings that you can set through here. Some of these settings are set at the Sitka level for the entire consortium, and some of them are set by local system administrators at your library. And there are also settings that are obsolete or for functionality that Sitka doesn't use. And our documentation has tables of all of the different settings, which indicate whether Sitka staff, co-op support staff can edit that setting only, whether local system administrators can edit it, or whether it's a setting that's obsolete or for functionality we don't use. We're going to talk about some settings that you may consider setting for your library. As I said, 478, we're not going to cover all of them. We're going to hit some highlights. All of these settings are listed on the handout. And one thing that's good to know when working with library settings is that for settings that have a true-false value, generally, if there's no value for the setting, Evergreen treats that as a false. So I'm actually going to switch us back to the slideshow because I've got some library settings highlighted here. So a couple general ones. We have the sending email address for patron notices. This can be updated by local system administrators. And this is the email address that your patron notifications show is coming from. And any bounces or any replies to like an overdue notice or a courtesy notice, those come back to this email address. Some libraries have it come to a specific person, others have it go to their general info or library email address, so that you can then follow up by, marking email addresses in patron accounts as invalid, or seeing that you did have somebody reply to that email and following up with them about, renewing their item or such. The next setting here is the only one that I'm going to talk about that co-op support has to change. And this is the patron view discovery layer URL setting. And what this one does is when you click patron view in the staff catalog, this setting determines what Evergreen opens up. So for most libraries, this will open up your Evergreen public catalog. For libraries using BiblioCommons, it actually opens up the record in their BiblioCommons catalog. So if you do use a discovery layer, that can be set up so that it actually shows you what your patron would be looking at. Now, on the security and privacy side, there's a few settings that I definitely recommend looking at, thinking about what you want for those values. The first one is number of retrievable recent patrons. This is how many patrons can be retrieved. If you go to circulation, retrieve last few patrons, and it'll pull up them in a search form, or sorry, a search grid. So think about how many patrons you want staff to be able to retrieve. You probably don't want staff to be able to retrieve the last 25 patrons that came to the circulation desk. The other one, similar, is the maximum previous checkouts displayed. This affects the number of patrons that show when you go to item status and the detail view and that circ history tab. So you want to think about how many previous patrons for an item you're likely to need staff to be able to see. So two settings, good to think about how far back Evergreen should be going. As well, we've got this OPAC inactivity timeout in seconds setting. Highly recommend having a value for this one to protect your patrons. So if they log into your Evergreen public catalog at an OPAC station and then walk away without signing out of their account, if you have a value for this setting, it will automatically log them out after that amount of time. And on the screen here, you can see there is a session timeout pop-up that will appear, letting them know they're going to be signed out for inactivity and doing that countdown. The minimum value you can put in there is 240 seconds, which is 4 minutes. As well, there's two settings that work together uh, to determine if you are using the last 4 digits of the patron's phone number as their default password PIN number for accessing the public catalog. If you have patron uses password number, patron password from phone number set to true, you also want the uses phone as default PIN because that will have Evergreen both use that 4 digits as the temporary initial password, but it'll also update the text when logging into the public account to say that you should be using those last 4 digits of your phone number. And the other one that also affects the OPAC is you have the allow others to use patron account privacy waiver, which you can turn on or off for your entire library. I know a lot of the public libraries are having that turned on, but some of the post-secondary and special libraries, it may not make sense for you to allow others to access people's account. So you have the ability to turn that on or off. Now over to circulation. A setting that I definitely recommend you check is the block renewal of items needed for holds. I checked in the system, and 86 organizational units as of Monday have this set to true. And we have about 110 libraries now. So if you're expecting that items that are needed for holds can't be renewed, go in and make sure the setting is set to true. Because otherwise, if that's not set to true and just left blank, um, Evergreen will be allowing things to be renewed that have holds on them. There's also an invalid patron address penalty. And what this does is if you have this set to true, if you uncheck the valid box for a patron's address, it'll highlight their patron account, it'll highlight the mailing address or other address in their account in red, and it'll also add a note indicating that that address isn't valid. So if you're getting mail returned and you don't want to remove the address because you want to check with the patron the next time they're in, you can uncheck that valid box, and then you have that visual cue that that needs to be checked. If your library uses missing pieces functionality, the item status by default has been set to missing, but you can change that to a different item status. So if you have missing pieces and you want those items to be updated to be damaged when you use that functionality, you can go in and you can set this item status to go use damaged instead of missing, for example. You also have the option to turn off the patron credit functionality if that's not something your library wants to use. We currently have 10 libraries that have this set to true to disable this. So if you don't actually allow patrons to accrue credit, such as by telling you to convert their change to credit, or by through refunds, so if you just leave that as credit on their account as opposed to actually refunding them for, let's say, the replacement of a lost item that they've now found and returned. So if you don't want Evergreen to allow that to be turned into credit, you can turn this off by setting the setting to true. You also have the limit due date by expiry date, sorry, by patron expiry. So if you run into issues where items are due after patrons' accounts have expired, um, you can have Evergreen actually truncate the due date to match the patron's expiry date. Um, and so that's a setting that's just a true or false. And then there's a number of patron account settings that help determine how the edit, registration, and self-registration forms work, um, both with what fields are required, what fields show when you say you want to see the suggested fields, and also what examples display. So you can have an example set for date of birth or postal code to show the format that should be used. And all of that is in our documentation. There's a whole section on the different settings related to the patron account that you can set, and that link is in the handout. Now, Lost gets its own two slides in circulation because there are uh, quite a lot of different Lost or settings related to Lost that work together to determine how your library handles lost items. So we start off with that lost materials processing fee. If your library charges a processing fee for lost items, you'd put a value in here, $2, $5. You then get to choose if a item is marked lost and your library charges overdue fines. Do you void those overdue fines when that item is marked lost? So the patron is just responsible for the replacement charge. And if that item gets found, do you generate new overdues for the period that that item was lost where it otherwise would have been accruing overdue fines? Do you restore the overdues on the lost item that it previously would have had? And when that item is found and returned, do you void the lost item billing? So do you void that replacement charge? And do you void that processing fee? And also, do you always void it? The void loss max interval sets a period where once that period has passed, the billing, the replacement charge, and the processing fee no longer get automatically voided. So you can say, okay, if somebody finds this item within 6 months of it being marked as lost, we will void the replacement charge and the processing fee if they bring it back. But if they find it 6 months after, those fees stay on the account, and then it's up to staff to decide, and based on your policies, whether or not to manually void those in discussion with the patron. And then the last setting on this slide, that lost items usable on check-in, which is the third bullet point there. That one for reciprocal borrowing libraries, whether or not the item can actually be checked out and go fill another hold right away, or whether Evergreen says, nope, the lost item has to go back to its home library or home branch for multi-branch libraries before anything else can happen with this. And then there's a few more lost settings. So you also have the negative balance interval for lost and the prohibit negative balance on bills for lost materials. So these two come into play if a patron pays for a lost item and then finds and returns it. So you have the option to say, okay, if somebody has paid for the item, but they then find it within 6 months of it going to lost, then we will refund it. But if it's more than 6 months, we won't refund it. And we also have the option of just saying, if they pay for it and return it, we just never refund that bill automatically. And then the last two settings here, the void lost item billing when claims returned and void lost item processing fee when claims returns, is if you have a lost item that you then mark as claimed returned, do you want Evergreen to automatically bill those charges? So as you can see, there's quite a few different settings, and how you set each of those determines how a lost item is handled. And if you have questions about how your existing loss settings are working, or you're not sure what to set for different things to get your desired outcome for lost, please don't hesitate to send in a ticket to support and we can help you figure out what values you need. Now we have some settings around holds. So you've got one which is block hold request if hold recipient privileges have expired, which when set to true means that patrons can't place new holds if their count has expired. Maybe you do want them to be able to place those holds though, so that when their hold comes in and they come in, you have a chance to renew their account with them. There's also one which has a really bad name, which is has local copy block. What this one does is if you have it set to true, patrons can't place holds on items that are available or reshelving. So basically, this is having this having this setting set to true means that your patrons can't place holds on things that they could come in and pick up off the shelf at the library. We only have 4 libraries in the system that actually have this set to true. But it has caused issues in the past when people haven't realized that that's what's set. Then we have 2 around the hold shelf. One of them is this hold shelf status delay. Now, what this one does is it actually delays the item showing to the patron as ready for pickup. So if you've captured the hold, but you have a hold shelf status delay of 2 hours, if the patron logs into their account, they won't see that this item is ready for pickup yet. And this can just give you a chance, if you need it, to process the item, the hold in whatever way you do before it's on the hold shelf and gives you some time before that patron's coming in knowing their hold's ready to pick up. You do want to use this one in conjunction with your hold notification delay. By default, hold notices go out 30 minutes after the hold is captured, but that's a customizable time. A lot of libraries actually have that set to like 5 minutes. But if you're wanting that hold shelf status delay, let's say of 2 hours, you want that email notification to also be delayed so that the patron doesn't get notified until you're ready for them to come in. The default hold shelf expire interval is a little different. That's the setting that determines how long an item sits on your hold shelf, waiting for the patron to come in and pick it up before it expires. So you get to choose what that interval is, and then when you go to your hold shelf, if you click the Show Clearable Holds button, anything that has passed its expire interval or a patron has manually canceled will show in that list to be cleared. And then you do have these 2 settings around targeting holds if a library is closed. So one, you can say that yes, target for a hold even if we're closed, and the other you can specify that you target for hold if the library is closed, but only if the hold is going to be picked up at that library. These settings are especially important if your library is closed to the public and marked as closed in Evergreen, but your staff are still there and you're doing curbside services, for example. And that second setting, since it lets you restrict to items that are just being picked up at your library, if you're an interlibrary connect hold, or sorry, if you're an interlibrary connect library, um, you can then say we're only going to be filling local holds while we're closed. Um, for example, this is something that libraries would have used during the pandemic. And then onto the OPAC, um, we have the ability to turn on the patron self-registration form. So if your library wants to allow patron self-registration, you can turn that on yourself. You can also turn it off if you decide that's not a feature you want available anymore. There's an OPAC login message. So you can put text into that setting that appears right after a patron logs into their account. So if there's some information you want to convey, that can be taken care of by yourself. And you also have the ability to allow users to submit addresses if they have an address change through the public catalog. It does show as a pending address, so staff do have to take further steps in the patron's account to confirm that address. So it's the patron isn't just changing their address, they're submitting that they have a change, and then staff take the further steps. And then these last two settings come back to the question that was asked earlier. Um, so by default, if you click on that library name, you are taken to that Evergreen generated page that with your information. But the library information URL setting, you can put in a URL that you want to use. So if you have a page on your website that you'd rather people be taken to than the one that Evergreen generates out of the information, you can put that URL in, and then you can set the setting, use external library information URL in copy table if available to true. And that means when patrons click on that, instead of going to the Evergreen link, they go to the one specifically on your site. So I'm just going to stop the slideshow here. And we're going to go here to, oh, not the self-checkout. And if we do a search here for rabbit, and so you can see we've got the link here to Maple Library. And if we click on this, because I've put in a value for that setting, we go to the Maple Library demo site. So that's something that you can set for your library. Now, in addition to all these library settings that I've highlighted, you may want to look through the documentation or the library settings editor itself for other settings that may be of use for your library. Now, talking about the public catalog, I will also note that in our manual, we do highlight some public catalog customizations that you can request, both with changing logo and color for libraries in reciprocal borrowing zones. You've got some library search scopes that are options, as well as some settings around what patrons can see in my account. So definitely recommend taking a read through this and seeing what pieces of that public catalog can be tweaked for you. And then finally, I just want to close with saying, co-op support is here to support you when you have questions or run into issues. We do encourage libraries to have a point person who triages issues and questions on your end before contacting co-op support. And this just helps filter out questions that are related to your library policies or the way you've tailored Evergreen. And when you are reporting issues to support, do please make sure to include specific examples and applicable patron and item barcodes, record IDs, and any other relevant information. Over the past few months, we have seen an increase in tickets that aren't including any of this information. And this just delays the investigation into the issue as we then have to follow up to get that necessary information to figure out what's actually going on. Many of the features and functions that we've talked about today are things that you set up and then probably don't adjust very often. While they're covered in our main manual, they can be hard to find if you don't know or remember exactly what you're looking for. So we do have a welcome site, which is aimed at new administrators at Sitka libraries, but it's useful for any local system administrator. And you can see on the administration page, and I'm just going to zoom in a touch here. Here we have an overview of the administration functions, including descriptions, and then links out to the main manual for more information. So you can see it talks about the different library contact details that you can edit with links to where you can edit that, staff accounts, library settings, everything we talked about today, plus more. So definitely recommend taking a look at this and using it as a resource for those things that, once a year or once every few years, you might go in and change. So that takes us to the end of today's session. I'm going to stop the recording and then we have a little bit of time if there are any questions.